The Israeli Prime Minister in Washington, D.C. for talks with the American president. It's their first meeting since joint strikes against Iran late February. The U.S. president playing host to the Israeli Prime Minister in their first meeting since the start of war on Iran. Divisions emerging in the last few months over what Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu would prioritize in any deal with Tehran. Mr. Netanyahu could be hoping for alignment on a firmer stance after Mr. Trump says he sees a good chance of progress on Tehran's nuclear program. Outside the White House, protests against the Israeli military campaign in Gaza, US-backed plans for peace stalling in Gaza, with Hamas refusing to disarm and Israel seizing more land in the enclave. Disagreement as well on Israeli presence in southern Lebanon, with another round of US mediator talks set for Rome next week, looking at Israeli withdrawal and a broader framework for sustainable peace. Gulf states not easing up either on their diplomatic efforts to end months of a deadly, damaging war. Oman putting forward a proposal to jointly manage the Strait of Hormuz post-conflict. The deal would give Gulf states more responsibility for the strategic waterway rather than handing control of it over to Iran as the dominant player. And Blake Sifton joins us live for CNA from Tel Aviv. Blake, this is the first meeting, as we have said, between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump since the start of war on Iran. What would Mr. Netanyahu be hoping to get out of this meeting?
Well, that's right. This is the first time they've met in 5 months. And previously, they would go no longer than 10 weeks between meetings. But it's understood that their relationship has become significantly strained since that last meeting just before the war with Iran began in February. At that meeting, it's understood that Prime Minister Netanyahu presented President Trump with a vision of the Iranian regime as fragile and weak and perhaps ready to fall. Of course, that didn't prove to be true, and none of the war goals explicitly stated by Prime Minister Netanyahu or President Trump have since been realized. So at this meeting with President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu is likely to focus on mending those relations as well as continuing to push a hard line on Iran. Now, when it comes to the relations with President Trump, local media here in Israel are reporting that the Netanyahu government had to push for this meeting for weeks, and it was only agreed to by the Trump administration when it was tacked on to the Lindsey Graham funeral and following a pretty significant concession by the Israeli government on Gaza. Over the weekend, the Israeli Security Cabinet approved an initial deployment of this international stabilization force that's meant to enter Gaza and help with demilitarization as part of President Trump's 20-point peace plan. Previously, the Israeli government completely rejected that idea until Hamas agreed to disarm. And of course, they have not agreed to disarm. Now, when it comes to Iran, the Netanyahu government has made no secret of the fact that they want the war to continue. It's understood that they were surprised and upset by the halt to fighting in April and especially opposed the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the U.S. signed in June. So at this meeting today in Washington, Prime Minister Netanyahu is expected to present President Trump with intelligence that Israel says shows Iran is attempting to rebuild its nuclear and ballistic missile program and push for a return to war.
Mr. Netanyahu, whatever he gains or is seen to gain from this meeting in the White House would have lots of implications for his survival politically back home.
Well, both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are facing key elections in the coming months. Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing a tough re-election campaign in federal elections in Israel at the end of October. And of course, President Trump has the midterm elections coming up in November. But when it comes to Iran, the goals and priorities of both of these leaders are opposed. Prime Minister Netanyahu has positioned himself as the wartime prime minister who only he can guarantee the security for Israel. And as I said, he's made no secret of the fact that he wants the war to continue. He wants to be able to continue to damage and degrade Iran's nuclear program and their ballistic missile program in order to sell that accomplishment to voters. Many people here in Israel do view the war with Iran as unfinished, as incomplete. They endured weeks of ballistic missile attacks from Iran, and then all of a sudden, in their eyes, the war ended with Iran undefeated, and with that missile program and allegedly that nuclear program remaining intact. But of course, for President Trump, he wants this to be over. He wants a deal to be made to end this crisis, end this war, and bring down prices for American voters ahead of the elections, the midterm elections in November. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is also said to be seeking greater freedom of action for the Israeli military in Lebanon and progress towards the Abraham Accords and normalization with Saudi Arabia following the nuclear deal with the U.S. But it may be hard for Prime Minister Netanyahu to come home with tangible progress that he can show voters, given how delicate and complicated many of these issues are.
Well, given that Mr. Netanyahu might prefer, as you suggest, escalation, and Mr. Trump might prefer a deal to end this war, Mr. Netanyahu would not be looking kindly on progress on mediation between Washington and Tehran.
Well, that's right. It's believed that that President Trump has been delaying his decision on what course of action to take in Iran until after this meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But ahead of the meeting, there are signs of hope on the diplomatic front. Mediators have expressed hope that they are making progress when it comes to reviving the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the U.S. Mediators, including Qatar, Egypt, and Pakistan, have been working to clarify the language in the memorandum of understanding when it comes to operations in the Strait of Hormuz, because different interpretations of the language in the memorandum of understanding is seen as what caused it to break down. Iran believed it allows it some level of control over the Strait of Hormuz, whereas the U.S. disagreed with that. Now, separately, Iran and Oman have been meeting to establish an agreed-upon route through the Strait of Hormuz that ships can take. Of course, the U.S. had been pushing ships to hug the Omani coast in a route that Iran opposed, and Iran has been attacking ships taking that route. As well, there are reports that Oman has sent Iran a proposal with Gulf backing, the backing of Gulf states, that would allow Iran to charge voluntary fees to ships crossing through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has long insisted that it has the right to collect fees, something the U.S. has flatly and completely rejected.
Well, thanks. Blake Sifton there reporting live for CNA from Tel Aviv. And we're joined by Daniel Levy. He's president of U.S. Middle East Project. He speaks to us from London. Mr. Levy, we just heard there from our correspondent the keenness for this meeting, more from the Israeli side. Mr. Netanyahu surely aware of the risk he might be taking with this administration.
Indeed, the risk. We've seen that Trump is, of course, unpredictable. We saw the cold shower. We still remember that when there was the first meeting in the second term with President Zelensky of Ukraine in February 2025. Nevertheless, the Israeli premier, first, given his political calendar, Israeli elections in just under 3 months, has to take that risk. But he will also have a high degree of confidence, will Mr. Netanyahu, in his persuasive powers vis-a-vis President Trump, been there before, done that, if you like. And he will also have a high degree of confidence that despite us being in unprecedented times, when it comes to the US-Israel relationship, when it comes to American public opinion souring on Israel, nonetheless, the network of lobbying power that Israel can still bring to bear, people close to Trump, people who are funders of Trump, some of the influencers, the bloggers, the podcasters. When you put all of that on one side of the equation, Netanyahu will still feel that he has a very decent shot at being able to bring the president over to doing his bidding.
So the noises recently coming out of the White House, the vice president and Donald Trump himself, perhaps summing that up would be, I call the shots when it comes to Israel. You do not think that in any way damages this very special relationship?
Well, I want to be clear, it does damage it. We have not been here before. We have had American presidents who express frustration. Everything is unprecedented about this administration, if you like, because we've never had a president that talks this way, that is so incoherent, inconsistent, divorced from reality. But nonetheless, look at the vice president. Look at the fact that J.D. Vance has clearly made a political calculation that if he is running to be president, and our working assumption is that he will do so by creating distance as a Republican candidate between himself and Israel. So that's new terrain to be on. But again, let's put back into the mix decades of America seeing this relationship through the lens of Israeli narratives, decades of building very significant and dense relations between the parties, decades of America taking an Israeli reading of the region, decades of seeing America do things which it's hard to explain as being in the US national interest unless you filter through Israel lobby power. When it comes to all of those things, Netanyahu still has a well to draw upon, which he hopes will be there in play in that meeting today. And even while we saw this talk of frustration in the last weeks, nonetheless, America has gone back into bombing Iran, a war that Israel was essential to beginning. Nevertheless, Israel saw that America was willing to undermine the MOU with Iran in order to secure a separate Israel-Lebanon agreement, which directly contradicted what was agreed with Iran. We saw an America that continues to give Israel carte blanche in the West Bank, massive destruction there. In Gaza, Israel remains in occupation of 70%. Israel has given the tiniest, not significant, concessions when it comes to these very geographically small and inconsequential pilot zones in Lebanon and Gaza. So Israel has had to give very little. And then the cherry on the cake, if you like, is when America announced a separate civilian nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi just days ago, it immediately course-corrected and said, but it's conditional on the Saudis joining normalization with Israel, which Saudi, under this condition vis-a-vis the Palestinians, has no intention of doing. So we still have this deference, this exceptionalism when it comes to how the US treats Israel. What will be in the forefront today? That old playbook or the new frustration? We'll know very soon.
Is there, given that both these leaders need to address their domestic audience more than any overseas audience, heading their political calendars overlapping at this point, is there anything Mr. Netanyahu might do that might damage, that might remove these very special cards that he has in dealing with the US administration? Final question.
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is more experienced than to do that. The Prime Minister would like to see further escalation in Iran. The essential equation there is, if you want a war of attrition with America, do it. Sorry. If America, you want a war of attrition with Iran, do it without us. If you want to escalate, we're there. That's what we prefer. He will want to try and get that. But if he can't deliver that, he will at least try and plant a seed. He will share some intel, whether it's real or whether it's cooked, that he will try and carry the president with. The Israeli prime minister would like immediate results, but he still has 30, 50, 70 days in order to pull the Americans to an escalation. He will want to show that he's the guy. He has the control of this relationship, and he'll want different ways to show it. It also appears, and let me close with this, that while for Netanyahu this election is existential, we're still struggling to detect how much President Trump actually cares about the midterms, which sounds crazy, but it's absolutely on brand for this president.
Thanks. Daniel Levy, the president of the US Middle East Project, looking at this visit, the first meeting between the US president and the Israeli prime minister since the start of war on Iran. Of course, Mr. Levy speaking to us there from London.